Sarah wasn't invited to her cousin's wedding. She was hired to serve at it. Limp from a childhood accident, face plain as prairie dirt, body too round for fashionable dresses, she was invisible even to her own family. So she carried trays and poured wine, while beautiful girls danced, never imagining one of them was meant to marry cattle baron James Morrison. But when James arrived and saw Sarah stumble under a heavy tray, when he watched her straighten with quiet dignity instead of tears, something in his carefully planned future cracked open. "Stop the ceremony," he announced. "I'm marrying her." Welcome to Old Life Stories, quotes from times when respect and love were scarce. What are your thoughts on these times? Don't forget to leave a comment. If you enjoy the story, like and subscribe for more. It's story time, but let's go back to where it all began. 3 days before the wedding that would change everything. Sarah's aunt arrived at the boarding house before dawn, her knock sharp and impatient. Sarah pulled herself from bed, her right leg stiff as always in the morning, the old injury from the wagon accident making each step a careful negotiation with pain. "You're needed at the house," Aunt Margaret announced without greeting. "Caroline's wedding is Saturday. We require extra help in the kitchen, not an invitation, an order." Sarah had learned long ago the difference. "Yes, Aunt Margaret, and Sarah." Her aunt's eyes swept over her with familiar distaste. "Wear something presentable. You'll be serving during the reception. Try not to draw attention to yourself." The door closed before Sarah could respond. She stood in the dim room, her reflection barely visible in the cracked mirror above the wash basin. "Plain face," her mother had always said. "Too plain to catch a man's eye. Body too thick, leg too damaged, prospects too dim." At 26, Sarah had accepted her place. She worked as a seamstress, took in washing, and lived in a boarding house where questions weren't asked and expectations were mercifully low. Her family acknowledged her existence only when they needed something, and she'd learned not to hope for more. The next 2 days blurred together. Sarah arrived at her aunt's grand house before sunrise, working in the kitchen alongside the hired help, not the family. She chopped vegetables while her cousins tried on dresses. She scrubbed pots while they practiced their dance steps. She stayed invisible while they sparkled. Caroline, her cousin, was everything Sarah wasn't. Petite, blonde, graceful. At 19, she'd already refused 3 proposals, waiting for someone worthy of her beauty. And now she'd found him, or rather, her parents had arranged it. James Morrison, cattle baron, owner of the largest ranch in 3 counties, wealthy beyond measure, and conveniently looking for a wife. "He's quite handsome," Caroline told her friends, her voice carrying into the kitchen where Sarah worked. "And rich, of course. Father says the Morrison ranch is worth a fortune. I'll have everything I've ever wanted." Sarah said nothing, just kept scrubbing. It wasn't her place to have opinions about her cousin's marriage. Saturday arrived with perfect weather. Clear sky, gentle breeze, the kind of day that made people believe in Providence. Sarah dressed in her best, which meant her only good dress, dark gray, practical, loose enough to hide her fuller figure. She braided her brown hair tightly and pinned it beneath a plain cap. "You'll serve drinks during the reception," the head housekeeper instructed. "Stay near the walls. Don't speak unless spoken to, and for heaven's sake, try not to limp so obviously." As if she had a choice. Sarah bit her tongue and nodded. The wedding was held in the town's finest church, followed by a reception in her aunt's sprawling garden. White ribbons, fresh flowers, a string quartet playing soft music. Everything elegant, everything perfect. Sarah carried her tray of wine glasses, moving carefully among the guests. Her leg ached already, but she kept her face neutral. She'd learned long ago how to hide pain behind a calm expression. That's when she first saw him, James Morrison. He stood near the main table, tall and broad-shouldered, probably in his early 30s. His suit was well-tailored, his dark hair neatly combed, his expression unreadable as he accepted congratulations from various guests. He didn't smile much, Sarah noticed. Even when people laughed at his comments, his own face remained serious, almost somber. "More wine here," someone called. Sarah moved forward, her limp more pronounced under the tray's weight. She filled glasses, invisible as always, just another servant in dark gray. "Sarah, the kitchen needs more pastries," the housekeeper hissed from nearby. "Quickly." Sarah turned too fast. Her weak leg buckled slightly. The heavy tray tilted, and for one horrible moment, she thought she'd spill wine across the white tablecloth. But she caught herself, steadying the tray with both hands, her face flushing with effort and embarrassment. When she looked up, James Morrison was watching her. Not with disgust, not with pity, just watching. His dark eyes held hers for a moment that stretched uncomfortably long. Then someone spoke to him, and he turned away. Sarah hurried toward the kitchen, her heart pounding for reasons she couldn't name. The ceremony was scheduled for sunset. Sarah watched from the kitchen doorway as guests assembled in the garden. Caroline looked radiant in white silk, her blonde curls perfect beneath a delicate veil. The string quartet played something soft and romantic. James Morrison stood at the makeshift altar, his expression still unreadable. The minister opened his book, began the familiar words. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today." Sarah should have returned to the kitchen. Instead, she lingered in the doorway, hidden in shadows, watching something she'd never have herself. A white dress, a waiting groom, a future full of promise. Caroline walked down the improvised aisle, her father's arm linked with hers. She was smiling, triumphant. The crowd murmured approval. Everything perfect, everything as planned. James Morrison watched his bride approach. His face remained serious, but that wasn't unusual. Men at their own weddings often looked nervous, didn't they? The minister continued, "If anyone has reason why these two should not be joined in holy matrimony, speak now or forever hold your peace." The traditional pause. No one ever spoke during this part. It was merely formality. Stop. The word cut through the garden like a blade. Every head turned. James Morrison had spoken. His hand was raised, his voice steady and clear. Stop the ceremony. Confused murmurs rippled through the crowd. The minister blinked. "I beg your pardon?" I said stop. James stepped away from the altar. "I'm not marrying Caroline." Caroline's face went white. "What? James, what are you—" "I apologize for the deception," James continued, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent garden. "But I cannot marry you, Miss Whitmore. I don't love you, and you don't love me. We both know this is an arrangement, nothing more." Caroline's father surged forward. "See here, Morrison. We have an agreement. A business arrangement, yes. One I'm choosing to break." James's expression remained calm, but something burned beneath the surface. "I'll compensate you for the trouble and expense, but I won't marry your daughter." "Then who will you marry?" Aunt Margaret demanded, her voice shrill. "You came here seeking a wife." James Morrison's eyes swept across the crowd, past the beautiful young women in their finest dresses, past the shocked family members and scandalized guests. His gaze found Sarah in the doorway. Her heart stopped. "Her," James said simply. "I'll marry her." Every eye turned to follow his pointing finger. Sarah felt the weight of 100 stares, each one sharp as a needle. "The servant girl," someone gasped. "The crippled one." "He's gone mad." Sarah couldn't breathe. This was impossible. This was some cruel joke, some mistake. James Morrison walked toward her, his boots loud on the wooden deck. The crowd parted automatically, too shocked to block his path. He stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "What's your name?" His voice was low, meant only for her. Sarah." Her voice came out barely a whisper. "Sarah Mitchell. Sarah Mitchell." He repeated it like testing the weight of the words. "I watched you earlier. You nearly fell, but you didn't. You caught yourself. Didn't complain, didn't cry, didn't make a scene. Just handled it." She had no idea what to say to that. "I've spent the last month being paraded in front of suitable wives," James continued. "Girls who giggled and flirted and told me exactly what they thought I wanted to hear. Not one of them was real. Not one showed me who they actually were." His eyes held hers. "But you didn't even know I was watching. You just existed, honest, real. And when you nearly fell, you fixed it yourself. Didn't wait for rescue, didn't fall apart. Just straightened your shoulders and kept going." Sarah's throat was tight. "I'm nobody. You're strong." The certainty in his voice stopped her protest. Stronger than anyone I've met. That's what I need. Not someone who looks perfect. Someone who is perfect. For me. Behind him, the garden erupted. Caroline was crying, her mother consoling her. Aunt Margaret looked ready to faint. Uncle Thomas was shouting something about contracts and agreements. Guests whispered frantically to each other. James ignored all of it. I know this is sudden. I know I'm asking something unreasonable. But I need you to answer one question honestly. Sarah nodded, unable to speak. Do you want to marry me? She looked past him at the chaos, at her family's horrified faces, at Caroline's tears, at the life of invisibility she'd been resigned to. I don't understand why you'd want me. Because you're not pretending to be something you're not. Because when life knocked you down, literally knocked you down, you got back up. Because I've seen enough fake smiles and practiced charm to last a lifetime. His expression softened. And because something in me recognized something in you. Can't explain it better than that. Sarah's hands trembled. This was insane. This was impossible. This was the only chance she'd ever have. Yes, she whispered. James Morrison's face finally broke into a smile. Good, then we're getting married. Right now. He turned back to the crowd, his voice rising. Minister, if you'd be so kind as to officiate a different wedding? The minister looked to Uncle Thomas, who looked ready to explode. This is highly irregular. I'll double your fee, James said calmly. But not unheard of, the minister finished smoothly. If the lady consents? Every eye turned back to Sarah. She felt the weight of their judgment, their shock, their disapproval. Her family's faces were portraits of horror. She thought about her life, the boarding house room, the endless work, the invisible years stretching ahead. She thought about the way James Morrison had looked at her, not with pity, but with something that felt like respect. I consent, she said clearly. The garden erupted again. Caroline fled in tears. Aunt Margaret collapsed into a chair, fanning herself dramatically. Uncle Thomas was shouting about lawsuits and breach of contract. James offered Sarah his arm. She took it, her hand shaking, and they walked together to the altar where Caroline should have been standing. The ceremony was quick. Sarah repeated the vows in a daze, barely believing this was real. James's responses were steady, confident. He slid a ring onto her finger, the same ring that had been meant for Caroline. I now pronounce you man and wife. It was done. Sarah Mitchell was now Sarah Morrison. She looked down at the ring on her finger, solid and real, and proof this wasn't a dream. James kissed her gently, chastely, in front of the scandalized crowd. Then he whispered in her ear, "We're leaving now, before your family tries to stop this." He was right. Aunt Margaret was already recovering, Uncle Thomas approaching with fury in his eyes. "My carriage is out front," James said. "Can you walk that far?" Sarah's leg ached terribly, but she nodded. Yes. They moved through the crowd, James's presence clearing a path like a knife through butter. Guests stared, whispered, but no one dared stop them. Behind them, Sarah heard her aunt's voice rising in protest. "Sarah! You get back here this instant. You can't just—" But she could. She was married now, to a man she'd known for less than an hour. She should be terrified. Instead, for the first time in years, she felt something that might be hope. The carriage ride was quiet at first. Sarah sat across from James, her heart still racing, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. She was married to a cattle baron, a man who'd seen her limp, her plain face, her thick body, and chosen her anyway. "You're wondering if I'm insane," James said, breaking the silence. Sarah's eyes flew to his face. It's all right. I'd wonder the same." He leaned back against the carriage seat. "Let me tell you something true. I've been widowed for 3 years. Sarah hadn't known that. He'd seemed so young. My first wife was beautiful. Her name was Elizabeth. Everyone said we were a perfect match." His jaw tightened. "But beauty doesn't make a marriage. Love does. And we didn't have that. We tried. God knows we tried. But we were strangers who lived in the same house. She died in childbirth, along with our son." Sarah's throat tightened. "I'm sorry. I blame myself. Thought if I'd been a better husband, if I'd somehow learned to love her the way she deserved." He shook his head. 3 years of that guilt? Then my ranch foreman suggested I remarry, said I needed a wife, needed someone to manage the household. So you agreed to meet Caroline? I agreed to meet several suitable young women. Your cousin was just the latest in a long line of girls my business associates thought would make a proper wife. His expression hardened, and every single one of them saw dollar signs. Not me, not a partner, just my money and my name. The carriage hit a bump. Sarah's leg twinged, but she kept her face calm. Then I saw you, James continued softly. You weren't trying to impress anyone. You were just working. Honest work, done honestly. And when you stumbled, I saw something I hadn't seen in 3 years of courtship. What? Dignity. You didn't make a fuss, didn't draw attention to yourself. You just fixed the problem and moved on. He leaned forward slightly. That's strength, Sarah. Real strength. Not the kind that comes from never falling, but the kind that comes from getting back up. Sarah didn't know what to say. No one had ever called her strong before. Damaged, yes. Crippled, certainly. But strong? I know I've thrust you into an impossible situation, James admitted. Married you without courtship, without giving you time to decide. If you want the marriage annulled... No. The word came out faster than she intended. I don't want that. You're certain? Sarah thought about the boarding house, about being hired to serve at her own cousin's wedding, about a lifetime of being invisible, unwanted, tolerated at best. I'm certain, she said firmly. James's expression softened. Then let me tell you what I can promise you. I can't promise love, not yet. I barely know you. But I can promise respect, a home, partnership, and time. Time to see if this insane decision turns into something real. That's more than I've ever been offered before, Sarah said quietly. The ranch appeared as sunset painted the sky gold and red. It was massive, sprawling across the valley like a small town unto itself. The main house was 2 stories, built of solid timber with a wide porch wrapping around the front. It's beautiful, Sarah breathed. It's home, James replied. You're home now. The carriage stopped. James climbed out first, then offered his hand to help Sarah down. She took it, grateful for the support as her leg protested the movement. A small crowd had gathered, ranch hands, household staff, all curious about the new mistress. Sarah felt their stares, heard the whispers as they noticed her limp, her plain dress, her ordinary face. This is my wife, Sarah, James announced clearly. She's to be treated with the same respect you'd show me. Anyone who has a problem with that can collect their pay and leave. The crowd fell silent. An older woman stepped forward, her face kind despite obvious surprise. Welcome, Mrs. Morrison. I'm Clara, the housekeeper. We've prepared the mistress's chambers for you. Thank you, Sarah managed. The house interior was even more impressive than the exterior. Hardwood floors, expensive furniture, oil paintings on the walls, everything spoke of wealth and taste. Clara led Sarah upstairs while James dealt with some ranch business. The master's chambers are through that door, Clara explained, pointing. Yours adjoin it, but there's a lock on your side, the master insisted. Sarah's cheeks burned. Of course, this was a marriage in name only, at least for now. Her room was beautiful. A large bed with a quilted coverlet, a wardrobe bigger than her entire boarding house room, a writing desk by the window, even a private washroom. I've laid out a nightgown, Clara said gently. You must be exhausted. Ring if you need anything. Alone finally, Sarah sank onto the bed. The events of the day crashed over her. She was married. She was living in a mansion. She had servants. She was terrified. A knock at the adjoining door made her jump. Sarah? May I come in? She smoothed her dress nervously. Yes. James entered, his formal jacket removed, his collar loosened. He looked more human somehow, less like a cattle baron, and more like just a man. I wanted to make sure you're settled, he said. Clara's been very kind. Good. He hesitated. Sarah, I want to be clear about something. This marriage, I'm not expecting anything from you. Not tonight, not until you're ready. If ever. Sarah's throat tightened. You don't have to. Yes, I do. You didn't choose this. Not really. I forced your hand by making that declaration in front of everyone. The least I can do is give you time to adjust. His expression was earnest. I mean what I said earlier. Respect, partnership, on your terms. Thank you, she whispered. He moved toward the door, then paused. One more thing. Tomorrow we'll ride into town. Get you proper clothes, anything else you need. I want you to be comfortable here. After he left, Sarah changed into the nightgown, marveling at its softness. She climbed into the bed, sinking into a mattress that felt like clouds compared to her boarding house cot. She should be terrified. She should be planning escape. Instead, she found herself remembering the way James had looked at her in the garden, not with pity, with respect. Maybe, just maybe, this insane marriage could become something real. The next weeks passed in a blur of adjustment. Sarah learned the rhythms of the ranch, the household, her new life. James kept his word about respect and partnership, consulting her on household decisions, introducing her to the ranch operations. He also kept his word about patience. They maintained separate bedrooms, though they took meals together, spent evenings in the parlor, learned each other slowly. Sarah discovered James was quieter than his commanding presence suggested. He loved the ranch, loved working with the cattle, loved the land itself with a passion that was almost poetic. He read poetry, actually, late at night, though he seemed embarrassed when she discovered his collection. Elizabeth hated them, he admitted, said they were sentimental nonsense. Sarah had picked up the book he'd been reading. I think they're beautiful. Something had shifted in his expression then. Read to me? So she had. And it became their evening ritual. Sarah reading while James listened, the space between them growing smaller even as they maintained the physical distance. 3 weeks after the wedding, James asked if she'd like to learn to ride. The ranch is yours now, too. You should be able to see all of it. Sarah's leg made riding difficult, but not impossible. James chose the gentlest mare, helped her mount, rode beside her as she found her balance. You're doing well, he encouraged. I'm terrified I'll fall, she admitted. Then you'll get back up. Like always. She looked at him sharply. He was smiling, not mocking, just kind. That night, after dinner, James didn't retreat to his room as usual. He sat across from her in the parlor, his expression serious. Sarah, I need to tell you something. Her heart jumped. What is it? I'm falling in love with you. The words hung in the air like soap bubbles, beautiful and fragile. You don't have to say it back, he continued quickly. I know this started as a practical arrangement, but these past weeks, watching you handle Clara's questions about menus, watching you comfort one of the ranch hand's children when she fell, watching you push through the pain in your leg without complaint. He leaned forward. You're extraordinary. And I can't pretend anymore that this is just a partnership. Sarah's eyes stung. I thought you married me out of pity. Never. The word was fierce. I married you because you were real in a world of pretense. And I'm falling in love with you because you're everything I didn't know I needed. She rose carefully, crossed the room to where he sat, stood in front of him, her heart hammering. I think, she said slowly, I've been falling for you too, but I was afraid to hope. James stood, taking her hands gently. Hope, Sarah. Please hope. Their kiss was soft, tentative, nothing like the chaste ceremony kiss. This was discovery, promise, the beginning of something neither had expected, but both desperately wanted. That night, Sarah unlocked the adjoining door between their rooms. Let it stay unlocked. 3 months later, they returned to town for the first time since the wedding. Sarah wore a beautiful dress James had bought her, rode beside him in the carriage with her head high. People stared, whispered. She heard fragments. That's the Morrison wife, the servant girl. He actually married her. James squeezed her hand. Ignore them. But Sarah didn't want to ignore them. For the first time in her life, she didn't want to be invisible. When they reached the town square, she asked James to stop the carriage. He looked puzzled but complied. Sarah climbed down carefully, her limp as pronounced as always. She walked to where a group of young women stood, including Caroline, her former cousin's face still tight with resentment. Good morning, Sarah said clearly. Caroline's lip curled. Come to gloat? No, come to thank you, actually. That surprised everyone, including James, who'd followed her. Thank you, Sarah continued, "for making your wedding so unbearable to serve at that my husband noticed me. Thank you for being exactly the kind of bride he didn't want. Without you, I wouldn't have found the love of my life." Caroline's face went red. The other women gasped. Sarah turned back to James, who was fighting a smile. "Shall we go home, husband?" "Absolutely, wife." As they drove away, James laughed, the sound rich and warm. "That was magnificent. I learned from the best," Sarah replied, squeezing his hand. "From a man who had the courage to stop a wedding and choose love over convenience." "Best decision I ever made," James said softly. "Best decision of my life." Sarah leaned against his shoulder, watching the town disappear behind them. She'd been hired to serve at a wedding and ended up living a love story better than any fairy tale. Because real love wasn't about perfect bodies or beautiful faces. It was about seeing someone's strength when the world only saw their weakness. It was about choosing connection over convenience, honesty over appearance. It was about a cattle baron who stopped a ceremony and a servant girl who dared to say yes. And sometimes, the best love stories begin with the most impossible choices.